Well, good morning. Do you like my new look? Everybody on TV is wearing their masks, but it's a little harder to hear people. I hope that everybody's got a good supply of masks. We want to welcome you. I'm Lyle Hanna, the head of the Hanna Resource Group, and you're joining us for Crisis Management for COVID-19, kickstarting your business after this shutdown. And oh my gosh, there's a lot to talk about. We're trying to do it in an hour and a half today instead of 2 hours, so we're going to try to really keep it moving along. But, economists have had a lot to say about this time and what's going to happen. We've got to find a way to have safety and help our customers and our clients and, people that would visit our businesses safe, and particularly keeping our employees safe. So we're going to share with you a bunch of ideas that other people are using to meet these kinds of demands. And we're going to be open for questions. So let me tell you who all's on board today. Jim Morris is back, and so you all know Jim. You want to flip that slide? There you go. Jim's an attorney who's been helping us for 5 weeks now. He started on this about 7 weeks ago, so he really kind of got a jump start on people, and you'll hear a lot of comments from him. Andy Barr is on board, our congressman. He's going to be speaking. I've got Allison on here. You all know her if you've been on our call. She's going to be fielding questions and helping with some wrap up towards the end. And we have two other special guests, two outstanding human resource managers. They're going to be joining us too. I'll show you slides on them in a minute, but Patrick Smith is here and Leslie Jarvis. So it's going to be great. Oh, there you go. Jumped right to it. But we'll get Patrick and Leslie on to share what's going on in their organizations. And I think that'll be a lot of fun. So let's jump back up to that first one. Here's our agenda for this week. We got Andy Barr first, going to give us an update. We've got some legal and regulatory updates you can't imagine. A few things have changed since last week. Some things are changing overnight, just like the first week. Then we're going to get an update from these Kentucky HR leaders, and then we're going to wrap up with some summaries and things. We'll take questions all along the way. Allison will be trying to get those. And, notice at the bottom of your screen, the little thing that says reactions. And if you'll move down to that, we may ask you a question or two. So like I might say, how many of you are dealing with COVID-19 at your office? And if you're dealing with it, give me a thumbs up. And we can track that. And so we know how many people are ready to talk about a certain issue. But let's move on to slide number 4, and that's Andy Barr. Andy, thank you so much for being on here to talk to us. A lot is going on, I know, in Washington, and with what you're doing, give us an update, and we'll see if we've got some questions for you.
Okay, thanks, Lyle. I'll be brief and just focus on questions for the most part. But as many of you all know, last Thursday, the initial tranche of the funding for the small business Paycheck protection loan program was exhausted. That initial amount of money was $341 billion as part of the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act, or the CARES Act. We knew that the program was going to be oversubscribed when we started to see the volume of applications coming into our local community banks. It was a very desperately needed lifeline for many small businesses. As you all recall, this is the program that if you use 75% of the proceeds of the loan for payroll for 8 weeks, you can get that loan forgiven. The amount of the loan is up to $10 million, or 2.5 times payroll. It can be used for payroll, utilities, mortgage interest, rent. Again, 75% of it has to be used for payroll. But it was a very popular program. A little bit of hiccups in terms of the lender onboarding process, but once that happened, the money really went out the door pretty quickly. And to put it in perspective, the Small Business Administration processed more loans in 14 days than they had in the previous 14 years. So it was extremely needed, and we were on the phone last night with the White House Chief of Staff and Treasury Secretary Mnuchin, and we are anticipating going back to Washington. We're being told that we're probably going to vote in the House on Wednesday morning to replenish the PPP program. So if you're a small business out there and you're in the queue, or you haven't received proceeds of the loan. Congress is poised to act here. The Senate may be voting as soon as later this afternoon, but we're being told to return tomorrow afternoon or Wednesday morning. And the contours of this legislation are going to be about $310 billion additional for the Paycheck Protection Loan Program. That's $251 billion or $250 billion just for the program itself, and then an additional $30 billion reserved for institutions less than $10 billion in assets for lending from small community banks, an additional tranche of about $30 billion for mid-sized banks, institutions between $10 and $50 billion and their customers, and then $25 billion in additional funding for testing, more money for use of the Defense Production Act, and also money for the supplies, the cartridges, the reagents, the swabs, the existing testing platforms that are being produced out there. Some of the companies like Abbott Labs, they're producing about 50,000 tests per day.
Well,
but
you don't have
need to really be
don't have
ramped
the
up
pictures.
for the reopening. And final amount of money in this bill is about $75 billion in additional funding for hospitals, especially rural hospitals.
You need to start it.
And then providers that are no longer doing elective, they're getting hit really hard. So that's what's happening this week. Also, one other thing.
Well, it says that you're on there. That's strange.
10,000 employees or below.
It shows that you're on here.
The Treasury Department is going to be rolling out, we believe later this week, the regulations on the Main Street Lending Program, which is not a grant program. It doesn't convert to a forgivable loan, but it's a low interest interest rate loan, 4-year term, between 250 and 400 basis points loan. That's through the Exchange Stabilization Fund at Treasury and the Federal Reserve, their 13-3 programs. You wouldn't get, if you're interested in that program, you can get funding for that and the PPP at the same time. You would get that funding through your bank, just like you would. The commercial banks are going to be originating those loans, backstopped by the district Fed bank in that region. And then that's, of course, backstopped by the Treasury Department as well. So that's where we are right now, and be happy to answer any questions. As you all know, the administration released a 3-phase reopening strategy and announced their reopening task force. And so I know a lot of the businesses out there are interested in when and the timing of that.
Great input. Andy, anybody have some questions?
So I invite everybody to put them in the group chat if you do have any. I've got a couple that are applicable to kind of the Paycheck Protection Program and how it works with some of the other regulations that have been passed. So I can go ahead and ask those. So the Social Security tax deferral, I feel like there's been conflicting information from some payroll companies. Can people who have been approved for the Paycheck Protection Loan also do that, or can they only participate in one or the
other? They can only, I'm sorry, the question is, can they participate in Paycheck Protection Program, and what was the other?
Oh, the Social Security tax deferral.
Oh yeah, no. Yes, they can. The only tax program that they have to choose one or the other is the employee retention credit. The employee retention credit cannot be elected if the business also seeks a PPP loan. But the payroll deferral, I believe, can be used in addition to the PPP loan. I would consult your CPA on all that, but that's my understanding of the law.
And will the process for applying for the second wave of Paycheck Protection funds be the same?
Yes.
Wonderful. Okay, and then we've had a question about the Paycheck Protection Program and the FFCRA. So people understand that they can't utilize the Paycheck Protection Loan and have the funds forgiven for the FFCRA. The question is, if the work is available, but an employee cannot report, so technically it would be an FFCRA leave type, but they do have the Paycheck Protection Loan and wish to continue paying them as normal. Later, will the employees also still be available? Like after the 8-week period, can they qualify for FFCRA again? It's a very convoluted.
I believe the FFCRA is a one-time. It's a one-time program for the 2-week paid leave. I don't think it resets. It's a my understanding of the way that law works is it's a one-time, and then the employer is eligible for the payroll tax credit to get reimbursed or a treasury advance. And then, of course, if that business is also benefiting from the PPP program, that paid leave offsets the forgivable portion of the is offset by the forgivable portion of the loan. So you can't double dip on the payroll credit.
Okay. And is there an update on the disaster loan assistance program?
Yes, actually, that's a good question. So our understanding, let me pull up my notes from the call with Mnuchin last night. So we do believe that some of the money that's going to go for the small business loans will go to capitalize the disaster loans. And let me pull that up. Yeah, and additional funding for disaster loans. So you'll recall that some of the money here there was a huge amount of demand for the economic injury disaster loans, which can be used. That those are not through the community banks; they're through the SBA, and there's a $10,000 kind of grant component to that, and those funds can be used for purposes other than just payroll. So you can use it for overhead, capital, other needs of the business besides payroll, which many businesses are looking for that additional flexibility. There was not enough money in that program. So the details are yet to be ironed out on this this next bill that we're voting on Wednesday. But there was a statement that the Treasury Secretary made last night that they're trying to use some of this $310 billion, maybe up to $50 billion to go into these economic injury disasters. Again, we don't have the total final details on what this package is, but there's clearly an interest in putting some amount of money, up to $50 billion, into these EIDL loans, in addition to the PPP program. PPP, as you know, has this restriction on it. 75% of the forgivable portion of the loan has to be used on payroll. The EIDL, you can use an EIDL and a PPP if they're used for different purposes. But obviously, because there's some desire to have some access to loans for non-payroll, that's what this would be for.
Okay. Jim, could you put up my next slide? Andy, I've got a slide here that just gives us an update on our numbers from yesterday. And I just thought it's kind of a good way to start off today's conversation after your comments. And you can see how many cases there are, and obviously, whoops, that fully recovered number never got fixed. I think that's supposed to be a higher number. But look down at the bottom there, 32,000 plus tests performing in Kentucky so far, 20,000 tests anticipated in the next 5 weeks. Those are numbers off television report last night. What about that? What are we doing to get more testing going? Because boy, you can't do anything without the testing. I mean, reopening with businesses, it's so important to figure out who has this and who doesn't, you know?
Yeah,
about that?
I think the acceleration in testing and the additional funds from the legislation this week will help accelerate increase in testing. The FDA has issued over 30 emergency use authorizations for various testing technologies. The most promising ones are the CFIED rapid test and then the Abbott Labs test. The Abbott Labs test Kentucky has 15 of those now deployed in hospitals around the Commonwealth, mostly tertiary hospitals. UK has one, Baptist has one in Lexington, we are told this morning. Those are the testing platforms, though, and what we don't have is the testing kits. And that's what you've heard some of the governors complain about. We need more testing kits. So Abbott Labs is manufacturing and shipping out about 50,000 tests per day. And we need to continue to kind of ramp that up. We have another call with Dr. Beckham that we're trying to get to make sure that Kentucky gets its share of those Abbott tests so that the 15 platforms that we have can actually be used. And again, there was an announcement yesterday that the president invoked the Defense Production Act for the swabs and some of the supplies. And I do agree with you, Lyle, that this is going to help reopen, move us into phase 1 and then in phase 2. If we can get more of these testing platforms in the workplace, in addition to in the hospitals and drive-throughs, then that's going to help people have confidence to reopen the economy. Mm-hmm. The other development in testing that you all should know about is that as of last week, there were 3 FDA approvals of antibody tests. This is a big development too, because the more antibody tests, which is I think called serology, if people can know that they have immunity and that they're protected, that will be helpful for many folks. What the epidemiologists in Lexington are telling me is that for businesses where social distancing is not possible, think a dentist's office or a beauty salon or a nail salon or a barbershop, where the services provided do not allow for social distancing, having access to a test 24 hours in advance is very, very important. So we recognize that the reopening process will require more testing availability.
All right, sounds good. Any final questions, Allison?
Yes, we do have a couple. So would a company with only 1 employee be eligible for the disaster relief funds?
Yes, potentially. Potentially they potentially could be. What I would recommend to anyone who's interested in that, and by the way, we've been telling people who have applied for the EIDL funds right now, the disaster loans, that unless there's another bill, that you're not likely going to get it because it was so oversubscribed. Some people are getting it, but I would encourage anyone to call, or if you want to get into more information about that, they can call our office, and Anthony Allen is providing detailed information about that program, and our number is 859-219-1366, 859-219-1366 to get more information about that or the replenished PPP loan program.
Fantastic. And then can you receive both $10,000 from the disaster loan and the Paycheck protection, or are those mutually exclusive?
You can if you use it for different purposes. If you're using your forgivable PPP loan primarily for payroll, and then you otherwise qualify for the EIDL loan, and there's actually money for it, and that's still a question mark, potentially you would be eligible for the $10,000 emergency express payment under that. But again, that program is very oversubscribed right now, and if you go to the SBA website, they'll basically say we don't have any money for it right now. So that's why there's discussions on the final details of this bill to potentially put in up to $50 billion into that program, separate and apart from the PPP loan program.
All right. More, Allison?
Our last one is just, what if you have no payroll and the owner is the only employee? What are their best options?
The best option there, well, PPP loan can be used 75, and independent contractors and self-employed, sole proprietorships, they're eligible for PPP loans. The payroll portion of, your own payroll will be 75% of what's forgivable. And then, whatever is not forgiven, if you can also use for rent, for overhead, for mortgage interest, for utilities, and if anything that's not forgivable but is that you get That's subject to a 6 months deferral, 2-year term, and a 1% interest rate.
Fantastic.
All right. Hey, thank you very much.
Okay,
Andy, we appreciate your making time to do this. Now, how about this? Andy, we can give you an applause right now just by hitting that clapping hand down below. So if you appreciate Andy being on here, he's been on here every week but one. We had a really full schedule last week, and so did he. But Andy, I appreciate it. So I'm hitting the clapping hands. And
well, no worries, and we understand that you know, we've wanted to flatten the curve without flattening businesses, and you know, many businesses have been flattened by this whole thing. But hopefully, the loan programs will help get us, you know, build a bridge to the other side. And you know, as Kentucky continues to see a declining number of new cases and our hospitalizations are lower, we've done a pretty good job. That means we will be able to, I think, move to a phase 1 reopening sooner rather than later, and that's what we're hoping for. No, you know, no amount of money is going to replace actually reopening the economy, and that's what we have to do consistent with public health. We got to get to a place where, with testing, we can reopen safely sooner rather than later, because we're talking about $3 trillion in taxpayer expenditure so far just over the last month. So we really do need to get to a place quickly to reopen the economy, and I think we're moving in that direction very quickly.
well, and that's what today's discussion is all about. So hang in as long as you can, Andy. We're glad you're on here. And we're going to move on to Jim Morris. And
Thanks so
Jim's
much.
gonna give us an update on recovery things. You bet. Thank you.
All right. So thank you, Andy, for your time. I appreciate it.
Absolutely.
So I wanted to provide a little bit of update and information on some things, and there's a little bit of clarification as well on some of the questions that are coming in about the FFCRA and the interplay with the CARES Act and so on. I'll try to cover all those. The questions been coming fast and furious, so let's see what we can do. So some things I wanted to cover too, unrelated to those bills, but in going into starting your jobs again and telework and so on. One of the things I've been experiencing lately has been some risk factors for employers, and those things have not been addressed by some of the people that are allowing telework. First of all, keep in mind, OSHA requires that the employer provide a safe and healthy environment. That even includes telework, and that includes someone's home environment. We covered this in week 1. We talked about 2 things. We talked about what to do in the case of a suspected coronavirus, and the second big feature of that slide presentation from a legal aspect was work from home. And we went down through, and I broke down the need for workers' comp, for OSHA compliance, for policies and procedures that covered people working from home, and several other things. I'd encourage you to go back to the Hanna website, click on that slideshow, and take a look at those. We're not going to boil that down. However, I do want to point out that if you're going to have someone working from home, you either need to provide them with a computer, or you need to verify that they have a working computer that's not going to expose them to some type of unnecessary exposure to radiation or anything else. And I use that as an extreme example, but you just need to verify that they are in a good work environment, necessary equipment, and a safe location. We always recommend when we're serving as general counsel, we recommend to the companies that we serve, if you're gonna have people working from home, make sure that they go to the bathroom on their break, that they don't leave their workspace until a break. That way, if they fall down the stairs going from their work office to somewhere else, it's on their time and not on yours. You don't allow them to meet with people in their homes, because then you're liable if something happens to the customer or client that meets in their home. So you need to spell all of that out. And obviously, we've talked before about the need to make sure that they're not doing overtime, that you set out what their time is if they're an hourly employee. So that's the main OSHA, but there's some other things that I don't know that people are thinking about, so we included them here. The data security issues are a big deal. So the biggest, I bolded and italicized this: turn off Siri and Alexa. For those that don't know, those are constantly listening devices with lowered security. The problem is, if you're having being an attorney working on attorney projects and so on, one of the things I'm very concerned about is talking to a customer or talking to a client and having them have listening devices. The problem with that is that there's no, you click on a button when you turn those on and you have no expectation of privacy because you know that they're listening the whole time. The other thing is that along with that, Siri and Alexa, the employee clicks on that the employee's okay with that in their home. They plug it in, it's great, turn the lights on, turn the lights off, turn the TV on, call grandma, call grandpa, do a video chat. It's awesome. The employer has not consented in most cases to allowing Alexa to listen in to the employer's discussions. That creates a problem because Alexa stores all of that information. So the employers need to be notifying their employees of the need to turn off Siri, the need to turn off Alexa, the need to turn off any of the other listening devices. The other thing is that the use of a home increases data breaches on a couple of different fronts. We covered a little bit of this in week 1, but we didn't go into a whole lot of detail because of the other things that we were talking about. But one of the things that you run into is if anybody prints off HIPAA or PCI compliant information at home, you have to make sure they have a shredder so they're not just putting it in their trash can. Once it reaches someone's trash can, that's public domain and anybody can dig through your trash, believe it or not. So if you have someone who is having HIPAA, private information, or PCI, credit card, Social Security, any other information at home, you need to make sure they have a shredder. You can get one on Amazon for about $30. Also, we put limitations on the ability to print out documentation. You can do that from your SharePoint. You can do that on a need-to-know basis. We highly recommend that you have limitations on printing things out, policies and procedures about anything that is printed out, and also that they need to log out of their computer when they walk out of the room so that their spouse or children cannot access any of the information. You also need to have policies and procedures for safeguarding the HIPAA, not just printing it out, but how do they do it, where are they putting it, secure portal transfers for emails, other things along those lines. You also need to have VPN computer access, installing employer-provided security software to assure that information is not being copied, and you need to advise everyone not to utilize a public Wi-Fi for laptops, tablets, or cell phones. All of those, if you're using Starbucks, you're using any other public access, and you're not going through a proper VPN channel, you end up exposing the potential of HIPAA, confidential, or PCI, proprietary, other documentation being shared. Also, we've been very keen on advising people about phishing scams right now. Phishing scams are a big thing. Especially on the coronavirus. They're trying to get clicks and they're trying to get information that's a backdoor way into your computer system, and you have to verify that you're protecting it, because if you're allowing telework and you're responsible for HIPAA, PCI, or proprietary documentation, and your employee then has their system hacked, you're the one responsible because you allowed them to telework and you didn't have the procedures in place. That's why, going back to week 1, we talked very extensively about all of those steps, having a policy and procedure manual and assuring that it's followed with telework. It is an entirely different ballgame. So you've got to look into that, contact an attorney to have them take a look at it. All right. Next issue, the PPP, EIDG, and the EIDL. There were some questions on this. I wanted to clarify a couple of points. If you don't have payroll, but you're an independent contractor, yes, you can apply for the PPP. It will be limited to the amount of money that you paid yourself in the last year, multiplied by the 8 weeks. So if you have a quarterly tax return, that's what they're using to calculate, and you can use that towards your independent contractor or gig worker, W-2, 1099, anything along those lines. one of the things that's happened is that they allowed those applications to start on April the 10th, I believe. Problem was they shut it down on April the 13th. Now they're going to reopen it. It's a second bullet I've got here. So let me just walk through this. The first bullet, SBA did announce it had no longer had funding for either the EIDL, EIDG, or the PPP. So shut it down, and that was nationwide. All banks basically shut it down as well. This morning, the number that's been floated, and I missed it because I was trying to take notes as well from Congressman Barr. I believe the information I received overnight from Mnuchin and a couple of others was $450 billion in additional funding into the PPP. The PPP, again, I'm not going to go back through it all. Go back and look at all of the directions we gave in week 3. But the PPP is through your private bank. The EIDL, EIDG is through the SBA. The SBA is no longer accepting. However, the SBA is not a $10,000 grant up front plus the loan. They've indicated in some subsequent regulatory guidance that it's $1,000 per employee up to $10,000 and then the loan. If you haven't applied yet, chances are you're not going to get it. If you have applied, chances are you're going to get $1,000 per employee, and it's not to pay to the employee. That's just how they're determining the maximum number. So if you've only got one independent contractor, you're going to get $1,000. If you've got 10, you're going to get 10. If you've got more than that, you're only going to get the 10. One of the other questions that came out that I just wanted to cover quickly on the bills, there was a question asked, and it was asked of Congressman Barr too. It was about the 8-week period paid sick leave, and it was a comment made that there is no sick leave under the CARES Act pay. It's not true. You get either or. You don't get to do a credit for FFCRA and get the 8 weeks sick leave. You get one or the other. So basically you can't double dip as the employer. Also, the employee doesn't double dip because they're either going to get the sick leave during that time and you'll get reimbursed dollar for dollar, or they're going to be paid during the 8 weeks. They don't get both. They can, however, and this gets to one of the questions I saw as well, there was a question on there about, wait, does a person get 2 weeks sick plus the 8 weeks plus the 10 weeks? The answer is possibly. That's your determination as the employer. So during that 8-week time period, they can get their sick leave and you'll get reimbursed dollar for dollar. They can get their 2/3 of the FFCRA if they're caring for a child that has school that's out. That 2/3 can be paid through the through the PPP. Too many alphabets, I'm trying. It can be paid through that, but they're not going to just be able to sit on it, get paid to not work, and then go back and get paid to have sick leave. So if though, let me just throw this hypothetical out. You've already paid them the sick leave for 2 weeks, which by the way, you need to take a look at our guidance because the guidance and regulatory changed on that. Statute said you're going to pay everybody that was on quarantine. But then 2 weeks ago, I gave guidance. I also gave it last week. The regulations came in and really clamped down on what truly is FFCRA leave. And if you don't have work available because of a governor or mayor's directive of a quarantine, then you don't pay the FFCRA. You don't pay sick leave. You put them on unemployment. That's how that works now. So just keep that in mind. Go back and look at our guidance because there's a whole lot. This morning, Mnuchin and House Reps have advised of an additional allocation of $450 billion that's possibly available. It's not yet done. Senate is going to be probably voting this afternoon or early in the morning. House will be voting tomorrow. If you have an application in process, the banks are continuing, at least most of them are continuing to process that because they were notified that there was a impending agreement that would be forthcoming this week, and to continue doing those. If you get a notification from your bank, one of my, one where I serve as general counsel, retained general counsel, did get a notice of additional information needed. It came with an alert that said, get it back to us immediately. Reply to this email, get it back to us, because once you comply, You're going to be put in the queue in the order that we've got them done, and we're going to rank order them by when they were processed. So if your bank asks you for information, get it back to them ASAP. And so banks need to promptly provide the documentation or file a new application immediately. If you have not started the process, get in touch with your bank, get the loan application from them in paper form, or go online and see what it was from the bank. Fill it out and fax it, send it, scan it, get in touch with your local bank. My understanding is local banks are working a lot quicker than national. If you have that banking relationship, start it and get it going. The earlier you do it, better off you are. I anticipate this being running out of money, probably based upon the last ramp up, probably within the first 7 days. So get your application in once this triggers tomorrow or the next day. Couple of other updates. I'm going to go through these quickly. OSHA did 2 different directives. One was a discretion in enforcement. One was for manufacturing industry workplace guidance. The manufacturing workplace guidance, these both came out on the 16th. That one is basically, if you've been watching the news about the CDC, that's all it is. That's why I didn't waste the time other than tell you. They basically said social distance, keep everything apart, set up alternating time periods, etc. All the things we've covered for 5 weeks. The other one was a little bit more important. If you have any concern about OSHA, they are allowing in the brand new guidance discretion, as long as you're making a good faith attempt to meet the applicable requirements as soon as possible, then they are allowing discretion and enforcement to their field workers. So do your best, and they're not going to come after you. They also have abatement deferred actions spelled out in this letter. This one scares me a little because then it talks about if you've had abatement deferred, they're going to do a monitoring inspection after the pandemic ends. You'll be put on a short list to basically they can come after you. So try not to be on that list, but they allowed some discretion to their field workers for those that can't comply right now due to the ongoing issues of the pandemic. All right, EEOC guidance. This is on their website. Hold on just a second. I was going to pull it up, but I can't find it. There we go. Here is the guidance. I'm going to roll through it very quickly, so I'm going to tell you it's at www.eeoc.gov/coronavirus. Then they have several links on there. They issued this additional updated guidance on the 17th. It's been a 3-week, 4-week change. There's some things in here I want you to understand. We talked about this in week 1, but it's critical to understand all of this. It's now been fleshed out by the EEOC instead of just the CDC and OSHA. So during a pandemic only, you may inquire of COVID-19 symptoms. Once the pandemic is done, this is an illegal inquiry because it gets into an ADA examination. But right now, you are allowed to do this due to the CDC guidance and the declaration of a pandemic. Again, we talked about that in week 1. You must maintain all health information confidentially in a separate folder, what I call a red folder. Inquiries are not required to be limited to only the EEOC's examples. The EEOC is way behind on their examples. They did update some of them on the 17th of April, but they're wrong on all of the ones that the CDC's come out with, like numbness, loss of smell, loss of taste. So you're allowed to ask whatever the CDC guidance is, and that again is a temporary under COVID-19 pandemic. Body temperature is allowed because it overrides the EEO guidance right now, and you can also require your employee to go home or to remain at home or be quarantined for 14 days before they come back to work. Again, that's normally illegal. It's allowed under the CDC right now because of the override. You also can allow a return to work. You see the parentheses there. The EEOC is highly recommending that you have leniency on the type of documentation due to the overworking of the doctor's offices. A couple of other things. Confidentiality of medical records. All this stuff, medical file, I already told you that. You may disclose the name of an employee or employees who test positive. You may disclose. to a public health authority. That's because of the CDC override of EEO confidential and so on, because of the need to shut it down. And also staffing companies, independent contractors can disclose the name of the employer, the employee, if they are temporarily assigned to another person's location due to the need to have tracing of contact, physical contact, and try to stop the spread. So even though typically you can't disclose this type of confidential information, in this limited pandemic, you can disclose the name of a positive COVID-19 or symptomology of a 19. Keep in mind, again, week one, we talked about a hoax that I dealt with at a major facility down in Georgia. You have to be very careful of privacy rights. So we had to verify first that they had the symptoms before we gave the name. So we were in a crisis. Make sure you don't divulge it if it's not true. So make sure you're getting proper information as best as you can. There will be protection for you if you accidentally do it in good faith and it turns out it's not real. Just try to do the best you can. Hiring and onboarding, you can screen applicants. You can ask post-offer pre-employment temperature scans. This is new as well, keep this in mind. You can withdraw an offer of an employment or delay it if they have symptoms. If the employee or the applicant cannot work and there's a need to have them start immediately, that's based on CDC guidance. You cannot postpone, this is critical as well, you cannot postpone an employee's start date or withdraw a job offer simply because they are older, pregnant, cancer, or any other protected classification that makes them more susceptible to the COVID-19. You have to take action if possible to try to protect them, but you cannot refuse them that job opportunity. Reasonable accommodations, I'm not going to waste a lot of time, but they've issued brand new reasonable accommodations that they recommend, and these, because they say they are not a burden, you have to be careful to do these things, or else if you don't, somebody gets the disease, you could be in trouble, and that's one-way aisles, plexiglass, other barriers. You have to continue to accommodate mental health illness and or disorders, but you can inquire, even though they're working from home or any other condition that makes it different, you still can inquire as to whether the condition constitutes a disability, discuss reasonable accommodations, require documentation from a doctor if that's necessary. And then if you've already given an accommodation in a physical setting and now they're working from home, they are still entitled to additional accommodations if those do not create an unreasonable burden on the employer. Reasonable accommodations do apply to teleworking. ADA inquiries can still be made, like I referenced above. Temporary accommodations, this is a new addition as of Saturday. Temporary accommodations can be provided during the pandemic instead of coming up with permanent, because they know that it's difficult to come up with permanent right now. Also, critical, COVID-19 is a factor for an employer in determining an undue hardship. What used to not be a factor is now a factor. Meaning, if it costs too much, if you can't deliver it, if you can't do an on-site assessment, if there's a modification that is difficult, if switching job functions is impossible right now because of all of the COVID-19, those would normally be rejected by the EEOC. They have specifically said if the employer can determine or demonstrate that they cannot do this because of the added cost, they can use that as an explanation for why they didn't fulfill their obligation under the regular EEOC. That is a massive change from the past, so I want to make sure you knew that. It is a temporary measure during the pandemic, but financial constraints and other physical issues, meaning you can't get to the house, you can't test people's work environment, all those things, they will take that into consideration for the employer to assist. So that's it. I tried to rush through it because I know we've got a lot, and I've got a lot of questions that have come up as well. I'm going to cover these unless they've already been covered. So I've got one here I'm going to read out. If I've had an employee ask if the current COVID-19 relief bill allows an employee to make changes to their dependent care flexible spending accounts, since they will not spend a lot of that money this year. The answer is not in the current, not that I could find in the current CARES Act or the FFCRA. They did not cover flexible spending. However, my experience has been with flexible spending accounts that they are extraordinarily flexible, and they cover a lot of things that are beyond your typical prescription and copay. So you need to verify what's covered and explain to your employee they may be able to go online, obtain additional information about what could be, including home fitness gyms. You may want to reach out to your benefit provider, like we talked about last week, to see if they will modify some of their policies to allow for flexible spend on a home gym, on a weight bench, on a weights, free weights, anything like that. Or toward an exercise machine or something that would allow them to do that. I wanted to cover one that we got last week and a little bit touched this morning. If you apply for the PPP and you're accepted, you cannot, the question was given or about the deferment of the Social Security taxes. Once you have received a ruling on your 8 weeks, then you cannot collect the deferred during that time period that you're getting the loan. However, the determination is made by your bank, not by the government. So once your bank tells you that this is your payroll and that this is what you're allowed to defer for tax purposes, once you're allowed to get the PPP credit for the 8 weeks, that 8-week determination is made by your bank. Once that's done, then you're not allowed to defer any further on the taxes. However, up until that deferment has been made, the determination, you are, and this is on the Treasury's website, okay, because I want to make darn sure I'm not the one giving you the guidance. The treasury.gov frequently asked questions about the PPP has on there. I'm going to scroll down to it. I got this question 3 times this week, so I want to make sure you know. First of all, you can use the fund. One of the questions this morning was, can you use the fund for sick leave, medical, sick leave, both? Yes. The next thing is, yes, it does cover your sick leave. However, you cannot both claim under the CARES Act and the FFCRA, and I put that on here too. The FFCRA is available on the IRS website. So that's where you'll get the information about the FFCRA and what you do get. If you keep scrolling down, how much of it will be forgiven, when do you need to do it? I'm going to find the I was trying to find where it talked about the, sorry, I'm doing this on the fly. It does not, I can't, there it is. No, it's on their website. I apologize, I can't find it. But it talks about once the deferment has been made, once that decision has been made, you can no longer defer your taxes. Your payroll, the 6.2%. Two salespeople who work on a base plus commission, can I furlough them for the base portion but have them continue to work for the commission? No. Then they could collect unemployment insurance for the base? No. What you can do is, if they are an hourly worker and not a salary, which it sounds like they are, you can make them unemployed full. You can make them unemployed, as the insurance commissioner explained last week, somewhere between 10% and 60%. If they are working part-time, that's how you would do it. Then they're entitled to the full federal $600 per week and the partial that they will get from the Kentucky department. I would go to the Kentucky department, contact them, and get the information from them. I know about 80% of you right now are laughing as soon as I said that, because trying to contact them has been a joke. We had them on last week. They said, no, we don't have any problems. Our website hasn't crashed, and I drug it down on the screen and said it's crashing right now. It's still crashing. This is the email address. They told us to feel free to contact them, so I'm going to put it on the website or on the screen. Here are your contacts. There's another one. Let me see if I've got it. For some reason it didn't show up. Josh is not showing up on there. Josh.Benson is the email, and I'll copy it and dump it on there. Let me see if this happens to be, no. So these are the emails. I'm leaving them up there so you can see them. I'm also going to do this, copy it, and I'm going to put it on the screen on the chat where everybody can see it. I will add, once I'm done with my portion, the email for Josh Benson. Sorry, I did it twice. Risks of me trying to do it while I'm typing. Those are the email addresses. The second part of the question was, whoops, I think I copied it by mistake. Somewhere in there it said, how do I get them on the Kentucky unemployment? Keep calling, keep clicking, and get through. The phone numbers don't work. I am still waiting. I told you last week I was waiting on one from the week before. It's been 2 weeks. I'm on the phone call list, and we haven't gotten a call back. So if you're an employer, there's a different phone number, and you can get through on the employer line quicker. You cannot get through the regular line because they just don't have enough people answering the phone. Question was regarding emergency paid leave and EFMLEA. How are they applied to salary exempt employees? You would do it by the hourly number. Sick leave has to be a full day. EFMLEA can be partial days based upon if they have to care for a child and so on. We covered a little bit last week on that. The wage limits are based upon whether it's a 2/3 or whether it's a full. Sick leave is full. Child care is 2/3 of the calculation with a max of $200 a day, $2,000 over a 10-day period, $12,000 total over the 10-week or 12-week period. The sick leave is $511 a day, $5,110 in the aggregate. How does putting, this is an important one, we answered it last week, but I'm going to cover it. How does putting a full-time salaried employee on part-time furlough work? It does not work. Under Kentucky's state right now, as explained by the commissioner last week, full-time employees are not entitled to be on part-time leave. They either have to be 100% off or working. You cannot use them on furlough. Furlough in the state of Kentucky only applies to hourly employees. Allison, anything else that I didn't cover? I tried to copy them as I went this morning, and I apologize if I didn't get to your question.
I know you hit a lot of them. That's great. We had one question about whether or not for the Paycheck Protection Loan, if internet costs would be considered forgivable utility.
Yes. So yes and no, depending on what you've done. As I'm going to make sure this is clear for everyone. All utilities, including internet, are covered so long as you had utilities prior to February 15th. The key was not the type of utility, although it did list internet, gas, electric, phone, so on. The key was, did you have a pre-existing that you're now trying to cover? So the PPP covers the following. Every loan that you have prior to February 15th, so if it existed as of that date, mortgages on a car, if the car is a company-owned vehicle or company-leased vehicle, mortgages on a house or a business, as long as it is a house or business that is a company-owned. rent, utilities predating not the utility cost, but the utilities incurred needed to be prior to February 15th. Then as long as you had them prior to that date, 8 weeks of that will be covered once you're approved on a loan. Now, the one question I haven't heard in this forum, but I did get in 2 different webinars I was involved in last week, and a client inquiry is this. Some of you are probably getting your PPP. The problem you've got is you've got a governor's order that says you can't work. Now you've got a PPP, and your first 8 weeks after you get the PPP is the time period you're supposed to be paying your employees. The question that was asked of me was, what the heck does that mean? Do I now have to pay employees to stay home for 8 straight weeks, or else I lose my credit that I'm supposed to get? And the answer I gave was not a legal answer, because there is no legal answer yet. I'm sure the regulations are going to catch up, but I checked last night. If anybody's aware of where these are and I'm wrong, let me know, because I'm trying to check 27 different agency regulatory affairs. But common sense says you can't open your business, and that the 8 weeks will start once you can open your business. My request or my suggestion is contact your bank, because your bank is acting as a governmental agency on behalf of the SBA. Reach out to the SBA, although they have not given much guidance on anything other than don't apply, and find out from them whether you should be paying the 8 weeks now, or whether you should pay the 8 weeks once you open. Contact the governor's office and inquire of the governor's office how you're supposed to handle this. The governor won't have the answers, but it will trigger to them that there is this conflict between the state and the federal, and the money and the non-money, the unemployment and so on. And it's creating a crisis of lack of information for those of us that are dealing with being a general counsel, retained general counsel, trying to give guidance to these companies, because the money's now in your bank. You're supposed to, it says immediately, first 8 weeks. But when does that 8 weeks trigger? Common sense says if you're trying to get people back to work, and the whole intent of the CARES Act was to get people back into the workplace, paying them to sit at home doesn't help. Now, if you're paying them the sick leave, and it's true sick leave, that's one thing. One of the problems I see a lot of people are going to have is if people aren't listening to the guidance and regulations that are out there, like we gave last week, the brand new guidance that says sick leave doesn't apply if you don't have work available. Then the question is going to be, you're paying people under what you thought was the FFCRA sick leave and the FFCRA FMLEA, but yet it doesn't qualify. So you may find yourself really in a pickle as an employer, because you're paying it, but regulatory's come out and said if you don't have work available, if you're shut down, if there's no ability to work from home, then you're not supposed to be paying these people. You're supposed to be putting them on unemployment. And a lot of your people are going to be better off on unemployment than they are on sick leave, and the 2/3, because they'll get the $600 kick from the federal government, regardless of whether they met the state minimum requirements. They'll get $600 plus any amount that the state gives them, $1 or more. So keep that in mind.
Thank you, Jim. That's great. And if you all have difficult challenges and you want to talk to Jim between these meetings, give me a call. We'll get Jim on the phone for you. And he has a business doing this, so he's staying pretty darn busy. Way to go, Jim. We really appreciate it. And we're going to move right along, because we're kind of trying to be done in 30 minutes here. So we've got Patrick Smith is up next, and a lot of you know him. He's a PHR and a SHRM CP, and he's the chair of Kentucky SHRM, very active in the HR community. And he also is the manager of HR for Stoll, Keenan, and Ogden, which is located in 6 different places around Kentucky and Indiana. So he's got his hands full. Pat, you jump in. He did a little survey last week of the 30-some board members that we have that are all active, HR people across the state, and collected some great information about what they're doing. So, Patrick, take it away.
Well, thanks, Lau, and thanks for your team and James and all the speakers for those wonderful seminars. And I also want to give a quick shout out to all our HR colleagues who are out there, you know, dealing with this and trying to do the best safety for their employees and their firms. So kudos to all you guys for all your hard work. So yeah, as Lau mentioned, I was sitting in my office literally a week ago, and my CO came to me and said, well, with all the news about reopening, what are we going to do? And so I put out a very informal, quick survey question out to the Kentucky SHRM State Council members to just please describe what would be like the new norm if your business was reopening today. And I got several good responses. And so this list that you see now on the slide is kind of a reoccurring themes that I heard as the responses came in. Obviously, the first thing for us, particularly here at our firm, just a quick history, we moved approximately 220 employees to a virtual remote setting within a 3-week time frame, which was a tremendous amount of work for our IT folks, and they did a wonderful job. So we also obviously had to issue out a lot of company assets, from monitors to some laptops and other things. So we definitely want to be ready to make sure we account for those things that are the property of the company as they come back on board with the organization. The other thing, and definitely what James echoed, strong concern about security of confidential and client business owned materials and documents, not only from files that may have been removed to personal computers, looking at, you know, what protocol we can use to make sure that that data was not left on someone's personal PC to flash drives and all those things as we talked about. We are presently talking about what approach do we want to take. Do we look at key individuals coming back? Do we want to do it by a practice group or a department? And so one of the things that we're looking at now is taking a snapshot of our facilities, taking an overview and looking at how we can clearly do social distancing and maintaining those practice groups if they have to come in any way, shape, or form. And also we've agreed and have already started purchasing some PPE supplies, gloves, masks, trying to build up whatever we can find out there for sanitizers, which I may have to walk down to Jim Beam and get some here. We definitely want to have a supply of those items ready to go. And we just really want to just define what our protocol is going to be for cleaning and sanitizing work. We'd already established a group of individuals in our office support team who came in, and every 2 hours we're going to common areas and wiping down with disinfectants like doorknobs, handles, refrigerators, and all our coffee pots are in common areas, and that'll be a driving point to make sure that those areas are well cleaned. Also too, just researching right now, our goal is to have a very intense deep cleaning of the office, and our carpet company has offered me some information on that, and I'll be checking with our building management team as well and what their protocol will be as a tenant, and if they're going to offer support in initially doing an intensive deep clean of the office before we allow people to come back in. The other thing too, as a essential business and working with 137 attorneys, they're anxious to get back and wanting to meet with their clients. And so we want to make sure we have a clear protocol, what that looks like in defining whether they can or cannot visit the office when they are present and what that looks like. We've also established, as mentioned, we are going to do temperature checking. We're currently looking at a protocol for how we'll do that so that we protect the privacy of our employees and the willingness to do that. And along with that, looking at those staff who are also currently facing child care conflicts with schools closing, those that still have ongoing health care concerns as well. And one of the key protocols we're working very diligently on right now is what will be our quarantine protocol. Obviously, those who are already experiencing flu-like symptoms, as James mentioned, you know, we have already insisted on people to go home if they felt any symptoms at all, if they felt ill, and definitely not to come to work at all if they were experiencing any symptoms. Same thing if they were exposed to any coronavirus, and those living in their household, friends, or family members. And also in our case, we have had some that were traveled to some of the key hotspots. And at the time, you know, of course, that was included New York, Florida, I think Connecticut, some other key areas. So we want to make sure that awareness is presented to the proper individuals. We've designated the HR director in our in-house counsel as two of the primary protocol individuals that will maintain this ongoing record of information as they come out. And then the final piece that was mentioned was, you know, how and will adjustments be made to our existing paid leave policies. We again are very concerned about the safety of our employees, but it seems to me that a lot of these have already been echoed and reinforced. But I guess my final comment, which was mentioned, was there was an eerie silence in some of the organizations, and that they had not even begun to think about this. And I think the reality is upon us now, and we've got to move very quickly. As much as we did to move them away from organizations, we've got to do everything now to bring them back in a safe and possible best way we can. So with that, you know, I'm grateful for all the work that our HR folks are doing to help their organizations. And again, grateful for these wonderful webinars and the input that has been provided with this constant moving target. So thank you very much.
Good work, Patrick. Thank you. Any questions off the line here for Patrick, Allison?
No, they're
All
not.
right. You
No.
just stay tuned. We'll see what comes up. So listen, our next speaker, another outstanding human resource manager, Leslie Jarvis, is the head of human resources for the Forcht group of Kentucky. If you're in central Kentucky, there's a good chance you know just who this is, but man, oh man, they have 2,100 employees. They specialize in, get all these different things, okay? Banking and financial services. They have an insurance company. They have nursing homes and healthcare facilities. They've got broadcasting. They've got print media. They've got retail, and they've got data and web design services, real estate, and construction. Is there anything this woman doesn't oversee? Leslie, in addition to that, she is the secretary of Bluegrass SHRM, and she's been teaching the SHRM certification class for BCTC for the past 3 years. So, Leslie, we are delighted you're here. Fun to have you. Take it away. Tell us what you want to share with us.
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity to spend a few minutes on this webinar. One of the things that I think is important, as Lyle mentioned, the Forcht group has several different companies, and we've had to take a different approach based on those companies, whether it be healthcare facilities or banking. Some of our companies don't have the ability to close or to have people working remotely, so we've had to take a different approach with each of our companies. One of the things on the first slide that I have that I think I've mentioned before is how management chooses to respond to this pandemic will influence the company's brand moving forward. And I think when you work as an HR manager with your different business leaders or managers of their particular area, their focus is on the profit of the loss of the company, how they're going to keep it staffed, how they're going to keep moving forward. And I've met with different managers, and some of them may not like these regulations, but they accept it and they're rolling with it. Others that I've worked with have kind of dug their heels into the sand. And I think what it says to employees, how we're responding to this, is how are they going to view us as an employer moving forward? Will they want to choose to stay with us? And I think it's very important, as I've shared with some of the managers in my company, is we don't want to lose a good long-term employee over this, who may choose a different business, who's been more understanding of their concerns and fears during this pandemic time. So I think it's very important to be recognizing those in the workplace. Now, echoing some of the same things that Patrick went through, as we look at the physical workspace when we're bringing people back to work or when we have people out. The Forcht group, we have a call center. We have some areas that are cubicles where you look at that 6 feet apart as being the new norm. How's that going to impact restructuring the workspace and thinking about that now when you start bringing folks back? The biggest concern we've had is the break room. How many people are going in and out of that break room? Is it really being cleaned multiple times throughout the day? Or do you have a cleaning service that's only coming in at night after that? So what should the rules be surrounding your break room and the coffee pot? And my experience in a workplace is the office refrigerator and microwave aren't the cleanest places anyway in the workplace. So adding to this, who is going to take on that responsibility? The same with shared equipment in the office, the copier, the fax machine, how many people are touching that? Who's responsible for cleaning that? Can you add additional equipment so that it's reducing how many people are using that? So now is the time to start thinking about that physical workspace and how that's going to look if you start bringing people back into your workplace, and thinking about those designs and those changes now before the folks return. Now, one of the things that I've noticed on Facebook is a quote that people are saying, and I am an introvert, so I can share these words, is, I don't like to brag, but I've been avoiding people since way before the coronavirus started. The reason I bring that slide up is when we talk about the new management style, I think one of the things that's always important when you're dealing with managers in the workplace is that every employee is different. And I think sometimes we try to take a management blanket and we take our style and we apply it to every employee, and we don't realize that everyone's going to handle this different. For some of the employees within your company, this may be the thing that they've waited on all their life, to be able to be sent home and work quietly and privately in their own house, their own little cocoon. For other employees, however, they like that social interaction. They like that day-to-day conversation. They like meeting at the coffee pot. They like the company outings. And so this can be a struggle for them. So we have to understand in our management approaches, every employee is handling this different from their perspective. So again, from the management side of things, helping your managers think about is, what are your thoughts on working remotely? I've had some managers within my companies, various companies I work with, who've said, I think I'm getting more work produced by employees working remotely than when they were working in the office. And I would say that's basically because there's a lot less distractions. So again, did this turn out to be a good thing that we need to move forward in allowing employees to work remotely? And then, do I have the policies that appropriately address this? And I think the attorney spoke and made some excellent points about this. Is probably a lot of us didn't have a telecommuting or a remote work policy. Does it cover the things that are necessary from the IT and from the security and from a workers' comp standpoint? Have we gone back and looked at our work comp contracts and so forth to make sure that we're addressing things as we should? And then another important thing is back to that employee engagement. How will that look for my team? My company was always having outings to Churchill or to Keeneland, and employees appreciate those lunches. They appreciate that afternoon at the Lexington Legends. How is that employee engagement going to change when there's not that face-to-face interaction? And then lastly, do I have the necessary skills to manage this team moving forward? Managing a remote team can be different than managing a team that's in the office day to day. So how do my skills need to change as a manager on setting performance objectives, monitoring their performance, monitoring the hours that they're working when they're not physically in front of me every day? And then again, as a manager, becoming comfortable with the technology that's necessary when employees are working remotely. So a lot of things to think about in that management style. And then last, about the employees. Are their concerns legitimate? And it's always one employee, that there's always one, as they say, in every crowd who's going to take whatever benefit, whatever policy, and take it to the extremes. But we don't need to apply and just assume that every employee is that way. Child care is a legitimate issue, and most people that have coming to work may have child care issues, many of them. So again, understanding their concerns are legitimate, their fears are legitimate, and doing the best, whether you have an EAP program that you can provide some resources to, but hearing what their fears are and their concerns. And then, do they have the skills and equipment to continue working remotely? If you decide through this that was a good decision for your business, then again, making sure they have the skills, the dedication, everything that they need to continue working remotely. And then how will engagement and pay change? As I mentioned, employees are different. Some will like the ability to be able to work alone, and some will miss that employee engagement. And how are we going to meet those needs? And then the other thing is with the pay. We have some employees who are on commission. We have some employees that are required to or incentivized by meeting sales or lending goals and so forth. Is how are you going to change that pay structure for them is another important thing that I think needs to be discussed. And when you start talking about bonuses and setting goals and performance evaluations, that's going to look a little different, and you need to explain that to your employees. But I think the important thing I would just end with is throughout all of this is communication is very important. And what I've learned through our employees at the Forcht group of companies is they've got a lot of questions. So keeping an open line of communication is very helpful to them and appreciated. Thanks.
Boy, great stuff, Leslie. I know you've got nursing facilities, and we are finding, we manage a group of 9 of those. And right now we have one person that lives there has a problem, and 1 employee, but the person that lives there is already getting over it. So we feel really good about it. But I know that's not the case everywhere. In fact, I think it's kind of cutting edge. If you can get your nursing homes in great shape, you can apply a lot of those things to regular everyday business challenges. What do you think?
Yes, we have 9 nursing homes as well. And one of the things that I think is important, it's always in the back of my mind, is one of those nursing homes is union. And you know, I know everyone has different opinions about unions, but again, someone is always watching how you're handling this. And we've had to take a look at the protocol within our own facilities, but we've also had to look at things that weren't there before, such as hazardous duty pay, and what we're asking some of these employees to do when they are working in a ward that may be an isolation ward. So I think it's very important to understand their fears and concerns as well, and also to tighten up those procedures within the facilities. Our facilities have been very lucky, and we have not experienced what some of the other nursing homes are struggling with now when it comes to positive tests of their patients or their staff members.
Good work. That's good. It takes a lot of forethought on their part to keep those places safe, but those same activities can be applied to our employers, other employers, and I think it's a good way to learn. Good work. Any questions? We're okay. Good. So good that nobody can even find a question. That's great. We've got a few more wrap-up things we wanted to share with you. Allison, that's a good quote. Is that yours?
Sure.
When it's time to reopen and return to employees, will you be ready? That's what we're trying to do, is make sure that everybody's got answers to that right now. So keep the questions coming in. Go ahead and flip to that next one. You know, we've been monitoring a lot of folks to see what they're doing. And of course, Tyson Foods has not been in the news for the greatest things because they've had a lot of problems out west, keeping employees too long and not doing the things that they've committed to now. So let's take a look at the things they've said they're going to do right now. They're taking workers' temperature at the first of every shift. They are requiring everybody to wear masks. Anybody in the place has to wear a mask. They're doing a deep cleaning early and often and regularly. So that's an important thing. They've divided out all workstations, and we've already talked about that today. It means you got to expand your break room because they're too small often for people to really be in there with any quantity of people. So they're reworking that, and they're reworking the workspaces. One of my close friends in Lexington is the risk manager for Walmart for 7 states. And in one day, they put up those plastic shields on every cash register to create some kind of a block between the people going through the line and the people that are, you know, taking the money. So we've got to, not everybody has the resources to do that so quickly, but everybody's got to do it. Back to Tyson Foods for a minute. No visitors. Yeah, 0. Just like the nursing homes. You're not coming in here. We meet with my father. I have a father-in-law that's 95 years old, and he can get to a 3rd floor balcony, and we can talk to him from the balcony when we're in the parking lot. That's as close as we get. And then finally, encourage team members to stay home if they're not well. You know, if they're not doing well, we don't need them in the facility. So just a few quick things. Allison, we've been working as a team with so many different employers. Allison's put together a top 10 considerations for returning to work. Allison?
Yeah, so this is really just a recap in a way, a nice little neat list of some of the things that we've already talked about. So 10 considerations to kind of help you guide creating your plan. So communication to employees, we've talked about making sure that you're keeping them up to date on an ongoing basis, but also whenever you do communicate regarding returns to work, making sure that it's clear. And I would always recommend in writing so that if they try not to due to all the unemployment insurance issues where they're getting extra money, you do at least have it documented that you've asked them to come back to work. And then communicating proper expectations along the way. If you are requiring them to come in full time to the office, if you're allowing remote work occasionally, and just making sure that you're clear with those communications. And then creating a policy for handling current and new COVID cases. Most people probably already have a policy in place. So just making sure that you continue to adapt that as the regulations change. And then internal testing for COVID-19. I know that's the ideal, is that everyone will have access to internal testing. So just make sure that you stay on top of the availability and be able to adapt your policy as that becomes more readily available. And then contact tracking and tracing. As Jim had said, making sure that you kind of already have a plan for how to handle a case whenever it does arise so that you aren't scrambling at the last minute. Figure out your notifications, who needs to leave that process, who needs to be notified, and have all that ready in advance so that we can help reduce the spread once a case has been found. And then the phased return of employees. So just figuring out how you want to return your employees, what groups you would look at, what work is needed to be addressed first, and what people might have issues that would prevent them from coming back in. And then our last 5. So preparing the workplace for distancing. We've talked about a lot of different methods that companies can use. Taping off spaces, using cones, getting plastic dividers, one-way aisles, changing workflow needs to reduce contact, and then having protocols about visitors and client meetings. So all of those things will help keep social distancing going into the future. And then PPE determination and allocation. Of course, availability is the biggest issue here, but as it becomes available, making sure that you know who needs it first and who needs what types. So who has interaction with external folks, who has a lot of shared materials that they work with, and so we'll need those pieces of equipment. And then travel policy, just making sure that you figure out what level of risk you and your team are comfortable with well in advance of any required travel so that you can be consistent and communicate that out. And then PTO considerations. We talked a little bit about how this could be an issue moving forward because you might have a lot of people with unused PTO if they did get paid just through the company, and they're all going to be concentrated trying to use it at the end of this year potentially. On the flip side, you might also have people who used all of their PTO during this pandemic and are going to need time off at the end of the year, even if not for vacations, maybe for sick or personal issues. So kind of getting ahead of what flexibility in those policies is going to look like is going to save you some trouble down the line. And then rebuilding connections. So Leslie especially talked about this and how team building can't be business as usual. People have certain expectations about sharing lunch with their team or going to happy hour. And unless those meet the social distancing guidelines, you're going to have to look at some different ways on guiding your managers on what's allowed for team building and rebuilding those connections.
Well, good list, Allison. Boy, when I look at that list, there's so many that need so much work. But if you haven't written your congressman or senator about getting some federal help for testing, please do, because that is going to be critical for all of us. And Andy mentioned a little bit about it, but you notice he didn't say when this stuff was coming, and they've been saying it's coming for a long time. I'm glad that the other Andy, Bashir, is talking about doing these across the state, but even there, it's a limited number. We're going to need more testing. That's clearly an Achilles heel here. So, you know, we've got to have, I think, federal help to make that happen. Any other questions? I've got one that came to me directly. Any other, Allison, that looked top that you want to jump on?
No, we've got, if we have time, there's one that we'd like to revisit, but I'll let you ask any.
We've got 4 minutes. Let's make the best use of it.
Well, before they start with the question, I'd like to have you, if people think that this is beneficial, have them raise their hand or clap or whatever you want them to do, so we know whether we should do this again next week or not.
I learned so much just doing it. I find it's really helpful because all week long we get other questions, but let us know. We're taking notes now on this, so we'll keep it rolling if you need us to. I've gotten a question about open workspace and people that have, this open concept office cubes. What about barriers? What is the right thing? And if people have got answers to that, we want to hear them. I told you about what Walmart was doing, but that's just, you could do that through the whole work area. We're talking to some people now that do call centers, and you know how they're pretty tight conditions sometimes, and they've got to find a way to spread out. This is a hard thing. This is why you can't get everybody back all at once, because you may have to get more space to do what you used to do in a smaller space. It's going to be a challenge, but we're looking for answers.
So, Lyle, there were a couple of questions I can hit really quickly.
You go.
All right, so the question was about full-time workers and furlough in the state of Kentucky, and the answer is you cannot do that according to the Commissioner of Insurance. Full-time employees, I'm sorry, I said full-time, salaried employees cannot participate in a work furlough unless it is a 100% furlough, meaning they can't be partially working 2 days a week, 3 days a week. They can participate in a furlough. We talked about that last week. Layoff, furlough, termination, they're all the same thing under the law. They are not different. So if you are laying people off, it's a week-by-week determination. If the salaried employee, truly salaried, supervisory, executive, administrative, and professional, if those people are truly salaried, they can't work at all. They can't answer emails. They can't do anything during the week. Then they can be off that week, come back the following week, but it's a week-by-week determination. The other question was, do you expect employers to be slow to rehire their full workforce? Will unemployment benefits likely be extended? I know that was for the congressman. They are expecting you to roll this out a little bit less than everybody back at work at one time, like we've talked about with the social distancing. Unemployment benefits from the federal government were through July 31st, if I'm not mistaken, and so they are anticipating the $600 additional to be rolling for quite some time. I know that the state has some work share programs, which is the part-time. Anything between a 10% and a 60% reduction will allow for additional unemployment benefits. And again, there was a question about, I think that's it. That covered most of what I could copy, at least.
All right. Allison, anything else?
The only other one that I see that we haven't touched back on is the best way to calculate health insurance for the Paycheck protection loan.
Oh, yeah.
With health, dental, and vision. Yeah,
that was one that I was trying to find. I couldn't find it in my notes. So the way you calculate that is you can, the PPP covers all types, and I have the slide was the one that I brought up before from the facts on the treasury.gov. It applies to payroll costs, including benefits, rent, utilities, and so on, and then what counts as payroll costs: salary, wages, commissions, tips, benefits, including costs for vacation, parental, family, medical, sick leave, allowance for separation, dismissal, payments required for the provision of group health care, so on and so forth. There's a lot more information on the treasury.gov website, but you basically are going to calculate that as if it was all costs related to payroll. You can't bump it up to try to cheat the system, but if you covered it before, you can cover it now under the PPP.
Wow, good input. Thank you all very much for joining us. Patrick Smith, way to go. Leslie Jarvis, nice job. Allison, as always, you're delightful, fantastic. And Jim, couldn't do this without you. We really appreciate you. Chase is in the background taking care of all the coordination. Autumn had to do open enrollment today, couldn't join us. But thank you all. Have a great day. Looks like we'll be back next week. We've got some open questions that are popping in right now, but we'll get those back to you. We'll get answers and get them back to you. Thank you guys. Have a great week. We're off
Thank
to
you,
the-
everybody.
Have a great day.
You bet.